All right, everyone, welcome. Welcome to our inaugural college planning presentation. We haven't done one specifically like this before, and there is a ton of information that we're going to go through today. And really, what we're going to center on is the exact problem I've got up on the screen behind me, which is families often overpay for college, and overpay is a relative term, so we'll get to that, take on maybe too much debt and hurt their savings and retirement plans because they've tumbled unprepared into the late stage college funding pressure cooker. Okay, I just read what was on the screen. What does that mean? What are we going to talk about today? The number one thing we are going to talk about is how to get a handle on the costs that a college choice may cause, the costs of tuition, the costs of even room and board, just total costs, and how we can most effectively pay for those costs without taking out student loan debt that might be crippling for the long term, or even better, without robbing our retirement funds to do it. Okay. So today, my caveat is we're going to talk a lot about colleges and choice and how to have those conversations. We're not going to explicitly dive into things like 529 plans or how to save for college. Those are things I can help with, but they are things that are a little bit separate because, and I'll be the first one to tell you, some of the stuff that as I was preparing for this presentation was a little counterintuitive to me. And it's been a while since I've applied for college and done all that stuff. So I suppose there's some new things out there that make sense. But I think this is going to be really eye-opening for those of you who have kids or grandkids, or maybe if you're watching this, you are a young person yourself. As you prepare to go to college, what are the things you need to be thinking about in terms of cost and how to prepare yourself? And not just what the cost is going to be, but how to choose a place that's going to get the most out of your experience on the cost side of things just as much as on the benefit side. Okay. So maybe the easiest way for me to do this is just to go through our material here. College funding and college in general is such a high pressure situation, both for the kids and I think for the parents. There's a lot of stigma around college, both in terms of what your choice is a more expensive college necessarily a better college? I would say no, but there's that model in our heads that's if it costs more, it's probably better, right? Well, maybe not, but I'm going to give you some tools today to think about or to talk about how to think about that. So what happens? We tend to overpay when we go to college. And I won't use anybody watching this as the we here. Just in general, as Americans, we probably overpay for something we could have gotten for less. We're driven by brand names, right? The big names that have really great marketing, or maybe it's I want to go to a Big Ten school or an SEC school, or, you go for the athletic reasons, even though you're ostensibly there for the academics. There's a whole lot of baggage that comes with a college choice. And that's why it can be such a high pressure environment. The other piece of overpaying is just how are you going to overpay? It's not the decision that you've made to go to some place where you pay a lot, but how are you going to fund that? Is it going to be taking out costly loans? Is it going to be the parents bending over backwards in order to, take out second mortgages, contribute from their retirement funds? Hopefully not. What my goal is that we can all today get through or figure out a way to find the college choice that makes sense without having to do that stuff. But that's what's happening to a lot of people these days, and it is worth talking about. So that's the gist of what we're going to go through here. We're going to talk about 4 different keys that you should look for. And I will tell you right now, as you're watching this, and if you're watching the recording, you can just even skip around to different sections if you want. There are some tools in here that if you haven't gone to college or looked at the college application scene lately, that you may not be aware of. And I wasn't aware of them. So that it will be really eye-opening how much of the cost you can work out ahead of time. That was really eye-opening to me, so I think it will be to you too. So a little bit about me. My name is Anthony Gerbi. I work for Stein Financial Group. We do a monthly presentation like this, and a lot of times they're on really pressing topics for retirees and people who are nearing retirement. That's kind of our bread and butter. But this is something that I do think is relevant to that conversation because, as we've already laid out, oftentimes retirement plans are the easy money to grab when son or daughter or grandson or granddaughter needs some cash to go to the school they've always dreamed of going to. So what's the first thing, most important thing that you need to know? All right. This is the counterintuitive piece. So feel free to read this a couple times because this is not even how I thought about it when I went to school. Okay. My key number one is that parents must lead the college selection process with the child as co-pilot. I'm not saying write them out of the equation because you have the most to lose. All right. Now, this is where it can really go against our natural instinct to say, well, I want my child to pick the school that they want to go to. It's the school of their dreams. It has the best program for their major, all that sort of stuff. And they're the ones driving this process. And as a financial advisor, I totally get that impulse as a person. But as a financial advisor, I've seen it go wrong enough that I know that parents need to be in the lead, even if it's sort of letting the child feel like they're in the lead and sort of guiding them. You need to take the lead on this and understand what they're getting themselves into. I would really encourage you not to just say, all right, child, throw a dart on the map or pick wherever you want to pick. We'll figure out the details. Look, there are people who can do that. More power to them. I've just seen that go wrong before. Okay. So go into it with eyes open. I'm going to give you some tools to do that. Why is it important? Well, we know 24% of college students drop out after their first year. That can lead to loans that you took out for that first year that you never get any payoff for. You just have to pay them off over time for no degree at the end. 9% transfer to another school by their sophomore year. So don't just assume that, well, they've picked their 4-year institution. And finally, obviously, we might guess dropouts are more likely to default on their student loans, but for all sorts of different reasons. But obviously, you didn't get the degree at the end that you went there and paid for. So that's even worse at that point. Now, we might be tempted to look at places like the US News and World Report. They always publish their college rankings. Not, in my opinion, a great place to look. They have a formula that can be gamed, and these colleges are good at gaming that formula. One of the things that was really eye-opening, and I didn't know this when I was applying to schools back in the day, was this site uses a 6-year graduation rate. I don't know anybody who signs their kid up for college or watches them go off to college and says, well, I hope they have a good 6-year degree in front of them. It's unless they're going for their master's, that would be a good 6-year degree, right? But a 4-year degree attained in 6 years, that's the graduation rate this site is using. And that's not really what I think of when I think of college. We think of the traditional 4 years. So it's a little bit skewed, the perception there. And every one of us wants to send our kid or hope our grandkid goes to a good school. I mean, that's the whole point, right? That's the ultimate goal we're chasing. But how do we do that in the most cost-effective way? Another thing you may not be aware of, and this is key, higher education is actually a buyer's market. Despite the news, which is true about costs going up and everything like that, a lot of admissions departments are not meeting their goals for the admissions per each year. And that's really not a well-publicized thing. Why? Well, in my opinion, probably because they don't want you to know that. But know that in the admissions department, they have goals for what they need to admit every year. And a lot of them don't meet it. And what that causes is 61% of students at public universities don't pay full price. And 91% of students at private schools also receive a price break. Okay. And we're going to get into actually how to think about that in just a minute. So if you're into that nitty gritty part of it already, that's what you're here for. But discounts are common. Now, that doesn't mean that after the discount, it's cheap at that point. It might still be expensive, but discounts are common. Now, we all know that tuition costs are at an all-time high, right? As historic high. But remember that usually kids are getting discounts. That's what the last slide just showed. And so the real price that you may pay out of pocket is not usually the sticker price, quote unquote, what they post as their tuition. So why the price cuts? Only 36% of admission directors at state schools met their goals of admissions by May 1st. 36%. That means 64% of schools still need more kids to come in. All right. And they might be willing to offer them a little bit more money, especially if they're students that they want to have at their university, good students, well rounded students, all the things that an admission director would look for. There's some other stats up there. But this is the hidden feature about applying to colleges. It's actually in your favor as a buyer to shop around because there are opportunities that can be had there. What are the key things to focus on in order to successfully navigate the college funding process? All right. So this is our little acronym for the day. I don't necessarily think you need to remember the acronym. What we need to remember are the most important features of each. So what you want to do when you're starting to think about college is you want to think about these 4 factors, okay? Price, that's the obvious one. How much is it going to cost to go there? Expected family contribution, okay? We're going to talk a lot about that. That is an actual number. Basically, the EFC, the expected family contribution, is what things like the FAFSA tried to get at. And if you're not familiar with FAFSA, F-A-F-S-A, we're going to talk about it in just a little bit and how to think about it and how to work around it. Not work around it, but work with it, I guess. You're not going to circumvent it. You want to use it. But that's what really determines how much you're going to pay. This is expected family contribution. So that's critical. Graduation rate of the school, and I would encourage you to look at the 4-year graduation rate, not the 6-year, right? Because that's usually not the ideal. And finally, if you really want to dig down, and this comes with a lot of baggage, so I get it, but starting salary, and you can break it down by major. This is something that's different from when I applied for schools, and I'll show you this later. There are sites out there that will, for the college that you want to go to, will tell you what your expected starting salary is and what that could grow to for each major at that school. It's an unbelievable tool. And you can kind of get a sense of whether going to this very expensive liberal arts school and pursuing a degree in English, how different that will be from going to, a bigger school and pursuing a degree in engineering, right? You can get a sense of what that difference is. That doesn't mean you have to choose the one that's got the higher paycheck, but it gives you the information to help make that choice. And as the parent helping to lead this conversation, that is a crucial piece of information that you need to be talking with your kids about. All right. So quick definitions: price, learn to use net price calculators. We're going to talk about that in just a second. Expected family contribution is how much aid a formula says that you as a household can pay. This is, again, like a FAFSA where you plug in your financial information as parents, and then it'll come out with a number that it expects you to kick in to a college expense, percentage-wise anyway, or it'll even give you a dollar figure. Graduation rate, percentage graduate, how many years it takes, very critical. And then salary. So I already talked through those. So price, we're going to talk about net price calculators, okay? Net price calculators provide personal estimates of what 1 year of college will cost, right? And generally the net price is the sticker price minus your grants and your scholarships. Okay, that seems fairly obvious. Okay, the cost minus my financial aid equals the price. That price might be then funded out of pocket. It might be funded with loans. It might be a combination. But that net price is what we need to figure out, because that's what you as a parent may end up being on the hook for, or at least part of. Okay, so how do you do this? Well, you'll need your tax return or just a general sense if you're up on your taxes about what you paid in for taxes, what your income was, all that sort of stuff. Many calculators will also ask, I'll get out of the way, for GPA and test scores to give you a sense of what merit-wise you could get. There is a big difference between merit aid and regular old financial aid or need-based aid, and we'll get into that here. So play detective with net price calculators. How does your home equity impact aid? How do your test scores impact aid? Go through and fill in numbers that you know are wrong just to see how big of a difference they make from your actual numbers. But this is the big revelation. Just Google, I'll get out of the way, Google the name of the school and net price calculator. A lot of times the school itself will have one on its website, and it's directly from the school. This is different from when I applied for school. You were going off of their sticker price that they published for everybody for what their tuition was. You couldn't necessarily see what it was going to be. You filled out the FAFSA and see what your aid was. I went to the University of Minnesota, so it was a public school for me. Private schools can sometimes have a different way of doing it. So I'll throw that out there. We'll talk about that. But when I give you my own experience, just know that it was University of Minnesota. So that was how we did it in my day. But now, type in the name of the school and really any school and net price calculator, and something should come up probably from the school itself. And that, if it is from the school itself, usually it's pretty accurate. Okay. It is extremely helpful. I have used them myself recently to help with people I work with who have kids or grandkids going to school, to just get an estimate of costs, because we're working it into a financial plan, how much they're going to contribute there. And it's incredibly useful, and it's incredibly easy. Now, there are some ones out there, I'll just give you a quick warning, that aren't as good. Okay. So the federal calculator, which you'd think would be fairly good, I guess, although not everything by the federal government is always good. It's, in this case, it's kind of not. You'd rather go directly to the college. There are a few ways that you can tell if something is a bad calculator. One of them is if it's really quick and dirty, it's probably not as good. It should take you a little bit of time to get through it. Okay. These icons, for instance, are a dead giveaway of a bad net price calculator. Again, usually the best ones are going to be through the schools themselves. You might have to do a little digging to find it, but usually through Google, you can, if you type in the name of the school and price calculator, net price calculator, they usually have them. At least the big schools do. And even smaller private schools usually do as well. So that's the first place to start. And by the way, when should you do this? As soon as the kid has an idea of where they want to go. You should be testing all sorts of different places to say, okay, well, based on our income as a family, our assets and our income, what would our net price be at, I'll use Minnesota as our example, University of Minnesota versus, St. Thomas versus McAllister versus St. Cloud State versus Mankato versus NDSU, all that stuff. I'm just throwing out names of colleges. I'm not saying those aren't necessarily better or worse than any other one, but you're going to get different answers for all of those. So do that research early so you kind of know what you're signing up for. All right. This was the biggest eye opener for me. Not because this was a new concept. This is essentially what the FAFSA does, but how incredibly important this is for you to know in advance. And this is something that is true regardless of which school your child or grandchild may choose to go to. So I'll explain what expected family contribution is, but also why it's so important. So what is the formula? Let me get out of the way here again so you can read. I'll go down here. It's a financial aid formula that represents what a household, and should is a weird word here, right? It's not what morally you should contribute. It's a reasonable percentage that either the government, if you're doing FAFSA, or the private school, which might use what's called the student aid index. That's kind of the same thing. It's just used by private schools versus the FAFSA, which is used by private schools as well, but is really designed by the government for state schools. But what they're trying to do is they're getting a sense of the parents and what this household could afford to pay in for their child's college education. Okay. So it's going to be a dollar value, and it could be zero. If you're coming from a low income household and you're going to, whether it's a cheap school or an expensive school, your expected family contribution could be $0. And that means you're probably going to qualify for the most possible needs-based aid. Different schools give out different amounts of need-based aid. So we'll get to that and how to figure that out too. Again, this can get complicated quickly, but know that whatever that number is, if it's a high number, you're probably not going to get a lot of aid, because that means they expect the family to kick in a high number. But if it's a low number, you can expect you will probably get some aid from the school. And that's essentially what the FAFSA is going to tell you, is how much aid you can get from the federal government, not just the school. So what are the factors? Income, non-retirement money, education accounts. So yes, your 529 plans do factor into this. It's not shielded from that. I've had some people be confused about that before. So your 529 plans count towards this, but this is the number one thing that I think anybody needs to do when you have a kid or even a grandkid who's getting ready for college, you need to be figuring out what your expected family contribution is as soon as they're in their freshman year of high school. Really, I'm serious about that. This is how you're going to determine what the school that they end up going to thinks you're going to kick in. Okay. And that's an important number because they're going to give you aid up to that number, basically. And then they're going to expect you to pay the rest. So it is going to give you an accurate number. So it helps determine if you qualify for aid. And it isn't necessarily the actual dollar figure you'll pay. Okay. So it's not just, well, my expected family contribution was $20,000 a year. So I'm going to be paying $20,000 a year. No, it still totally depends on the school that child goes to. But know that an expected family contribution that is high means they think you're going to kick in money, means you're probably not going to get as much need-based aid as somebody whose expected family contribution is low. It can be a little tricky to complete. It is incredibly important to get right. We're going to talk about it a little bit later, but I can actually help you complete that. I can help you figure out this number. There's calculators that are publicly available and they do a great job. So I'm not saying I have the magic formula. I'm just saying I can help you understand the questions that something like this is asking. All right. So let's talk about it a little bit more. There's two main formulas. The federal formula tied to the free application for federal student aid, which is called the FAFSA. And then there's the institutional formula, which is tied to a set of parameters that they've defined. And it's a financial application that roughly 200 private colleges work. So if you're looking at state schools, you probably don't need to worry about that. You're probably going to be using the FAFSA. But if you wanted to take a look at some private schools, especially smaller ones, your liberal arts schools, things like that, it would be helpful to get a sense of what the institutional formula would give you. And again, you might hear the terminology student aid index, SAI. That is the same thing, essentially, as expected family contribution. All right. So here's a little alarm bell that should be happening for anybody who's got kids that are on their way to school. To qualify for any federal and state aid, you have to file your FAFSA. So hopefully everybody knows that. I think that word has gotten out. You want to file early. Okay. This is why we're doing this in August. You want to file on or shortly after October 1st to have the best chance at aid. And I'm talking about aid for the 2025 school year. You want to file on October 1st. So you got to be a year in advance here. For the best shot, obviously this has already happened, so there's nothing we can do about it now. But for this coming school year, 2024 to 25, you wanted to have filed in December. That was the earliest you could have filed then. So you want to be early. Why do you want to be early? Because statistically, early FAFSA filers receive more aid. Okay. And partially because there's just more there. There's the maximum amount still yet to give out. It is possible that money can run out of these funds. And if you apply late, you are running the risk that the money has dwindled or run out by the time they get your application. So you want to apply for the FAFSA as soon as you possibly can. Now, again, when do you do this? You do this basically your child's senior year of high school. So the year before they go off to college, you apply for financial aid. Ideally, you've been potentially accepted into a school. Obviously, if you haven't been, then you need to factor that in to do the FAFSA. A lot of times you still can do the FAFSA then because it's federal or state aid, but then it might get adjusted if you go to a different school versus the other. So, it doesn't mean you have to have your college locked in a year in advance, but it'd be nice just to have the best, clearest possible numbers. Right. But file it early. That is my takeaway from this. Again, there's a lot of information on the screen, but file the FAFSA early. You'll get more aid, statistically speaking, anyway. So your expected family contribution. Again, I've been hammering this topic home specifically because this is the number that schools use to calculate how much needs-based aid they're going to hand out. This is incredibly important for expensive schools, which tend to be private schools, right? They are going to give out more needs-based aid, maybe because they have a nice endowment, maybe because that's just part of their charter, potentially. But they need to know how much you qualify for, or your kid, in this case, qualifies for. Lower amounts or low-income families can have $0, meaning by the formula, the school or the government doesn't expect the family to be able to kick in anything for college costs. that means that child will probably qualify for the maximum amount of merit-based, or, well, merit-based is merit-based, but of needs-based aid, right? But if you have a higher expected family contribution, you're going to be footing more of the bill yourself, potentially. And that's just because you have more means. That's kind of where there's no way to make it perfectly fair, but this is sort of the fairness part of the equation, right? People who have more money are expected to pay more. People who have less are expected to get more needs-based financial aid. And that's just how a lot of these colleges do it. So you want to get your expected family contribution as soon as possible. If you have a kid in high school or a grandchild, you should be doing it now, because this number probably won't significantly change over the 4 years they're in high school. And it's going to give you so much clarity on what your costs for college might be across different schools. So it's really going to help that conversation move much easier and much faster than if you're starting from scratch, in their junior year and they're just starting to look at colleges. I can help you generate your EFC, your expected family contribution. If you're totally lost by this and you're like, hey, I would really like, Anthony, some help figuring that out, I can help you. It is a do-it-yourself kind of thing. I would just be walking you through it, basically. But that is something I am offering. And if you would like it, just get in touch with us. And we'll set up a time and we'll go through it. Usually the College Board is a good place to go. Their website has a tool where you can kind of estimate it. You don't have to go fill out the FAFSA if your kid's a freshman, because that's not applicable then. But you can approximate what would happen if you did fill out the FAFSA. That's why I say do it as soon as they're a freshman year. I mean, you could even do it before that. I'm saying freshman year of high school is when probably the latest you want to do it, as you start making plans for this. That's when I would prefer the people I work with do it, if at all possible. So again, I can help you. The College Board has resources. You can go to their website. There's a lot of great ways to get this information. So what if you have a small expected family contribution? So your income is not like upper echelon. When you fill out the report, it says, yeah, your expected family contribution is small. Probably you'll get some needs-based aid. Hey, that's great. That'll help your child go to college for a much more affordable price than what sticker price would be. What should you do? Well, one of the things you could look at are in-state public universities. That's going to keep the starting cost down. So after your needs-based comes in, you're going to be paying much, much less than even an in-state private school on average. And again, all schools are different. So take that caveat. But file the FAFSA early. Again, I recommend everybody file the FAFSA early, but if you're expecting to get aid from the FAFSA, definitely file it early, okay? And early as in as soon as you can the year before you go to school, whenever the application date opens, get it in that day, seriously, because aid can run out. And then look for colleges, and I'm going to give you some tools to do this, that are generous with their need-based financial aid. So private schools often give out need-based aid too, not in the form of grants from the federal government, but just in more or less tuition discounts. That's effectively what they are. But I'll go through that in just a little bit here. So if you do come from a family with means and your expected family contribution is larger, what you probably want to do in that case is look for private colleges that give good merit scholarships, right? Scholarships you can earn that don't factor in how much money your family has. Especially if you don't really qualify for any needs-based financial aid. Probably, though, avoid the elite universities. And again, I'm saying this purely on the price standpoint. If your kid wants to go to an elite university and they can get in and we can pay the bill, great. Do it. They're elite for a reason. But if we're looking to maximize our return on investment, I guess is how I would put it, then you might want to avoid the brand name universities that provide no merit scholarships to affluent students. A lot of these elite universities are really looking for lower income people to kind of flesh out their admissions roles. And they may not give you as much help if you're not really a high needs-based person. And look at in-state and out-of-state public universities that do give merit scholarships. So you want to focus on the merit side of the equation if you don't qualify for the needs-based. That's essentially what I'm saying. Once you've got your expected family contribution, you can target the right kind of schools. That's the whole point. You can shop more effectively once you get this number, okay? we're going to move on to the next piece. So the first piece was price. Obviously, what's the sticker price? What are you actually going to pay? The second piece of our acronym was the expected family contribution. So know how much needs-based you may qualify for, because that can really make a big difference. And now let's look at the graduation rate, okay? And this hopefully is pretty self-explanatory. Again, the big misnomer about a lot of the public lists of schools is that they'll often publish the 6-year graduation rate as just the graduation rate. That's not really, I have a daughter, she's 1.5, so I've got a ways to go before I have to think about college. But when I look at schools with her, if that's where we end up going one day, I'm going to want to know the 4-year graduation rate, not the 6-year. My goal would be, let's get done before 6 years, unless you're going for your master's or something like that, right? So learn what the 4-year graduation rate, and know that the rates are not as good as you might expect. At public colleges and universities, 37% is the 4-year graduation rate. Now, that will vary from school to school, but that's how you want to be shopping. And as a parent, as a kid, of course, the kid's going to say, well, yeah, of course, I'm going to go there day one and it's going to be perfect. And I'm going to stay there for 4 years and I'm going to be done. And you're going to say, that's great. I hope that happens. But I'm going to start thinking about what happens if it doesn't go the way you want it to go. And what you should know is how likely statistically is the average kid who goes to these schools to graduate. This is the average across all private and public. You'll look at individual schools and see what they are. So on average, averages, again, no person is average, but we can use them to infer some things. A student now requires 5.3 years to graduate from a 4-year institution, okay? Over 30% of students will not graduate in 6 years. So when you're thinking about your budgeting and saying, hey, I'd like to help out my child with college costs, you plan for them to not do it in 4 years. Maybe they will, and that's great, but plan for them not to do it would be my advice as a financial advisor, and see if that, hopefully that won't break the bank is the point on your end. For students with worse GPA or weak academic background, the probability of graduating is even worse. So you really want to be, if your child is not a straight A student, which obviously not all kids are, and some kids really blossom when they get to college, so that's not to say anything about their future. But if they're not, know that statistically, the odds are a little bit more against them than average, okay? That's all I want to say about that. And half of all college dropouts become delinquent on their student loans within 3 years of leaving college. What I really encourage people to do, this is a little bit me talking here, is really try to find a place that they feel like they can stick in versus the perfect academic program, because they're doing academics for, 8 hours a day, probably much less, right? They're doing their main day academic wise, if not 4 hours a day, maybe if you're lucky, right? But they're doing the rest of the day. They're living in the dorms, they're eating the food, they're meeting friends, they're doing activities. Is that school good for them? Are they gonna, is the culture there a fit for them? There may be no way to know that going in. So I'm not saying that's an easy thing to figure out, but we got to make an effort to figure that out, because if they do leave immediately and they've racked up a year or two of debt and now don't even have the degree to show for it, that's really a bad outcome for everybody. It's not about, if it's not the place for them, they need to get out. I totally agree with that. But just let's do as much of our homework going in as possible. The Federal College Navigator is a great source to find out graduation rates. There you'll see statistics, retention rates. I won't go through all this. This is just averages here again. So find out what the graduation rate is and just think about that in your lifestyle. I mean, I would recommend to anybody, this is me just personally, and I was fortunate enough to have this opportunity. If in high school they have the ability to take college classes or get AP credits or however your school does it, that is a huge cost saver. I was able to do that as a student, and I was able to graduate actually in 3 years versus 4 because I had enough credits coming in from high school that I was basically a sophomore when I walked onto campus. So not everybody, that's not for everybody. Not everybody can do that. I totally get that. Not every school offers a good program like that. But if they do, that can be a huge cost savings in the long run. And it could even make, time be less of a factor with that graduation rate conversation. So compare projected school prices versus school starting salary data. Here's where it's a little sticky, okay? Because I have a daughter, and again, she's not college age yet, but I would want her to go to school for something she's passionate about and for something that, yeah, maybe she could make in her career, but she's going to be fulfilled by studying it, by going deeper into that. I mean, that's the romantic vision of college, maybe that we don't all have, but if we were to conjure that up, that's what it would look like. But we do need to consider the hard reality that not all majors are created equal when it comes to what career prospects they will turn into when you do graduate. Okay. So consider a school's price tag with the intended major in mind. And then that will give us a sense of what our return on the investment of college will be. And again, I'm not saying it's all about the money. It's about the experience. It's about living somewhere different potentially for them. It's about experiencing new ideas. All that stuff is important. But that's all the qualitative stuff. What I'm focused on is the quantitative, the dollars and cents piece. And what I would not want to happen is to pay for a very expensive school and get a degree at that school that doesn't usually pay out very well. And so this kid is going to have trouble paying back their debts with student loans in the long run. That's sort of the issue that's popped up in our country and even around the world to an extent. And that's the thing we got to be cognizant of. So it's not making the decision for you, but it's another factor to bring in. So, by the way, there are great tools for this. Just like I mentioned, there are good tools for the expected family contribution, and you can just Google the net price calculator for any school and it'll give you the price. That's huge. This is another fantastic resource that I would encourage anybody with kids who are getting ready for college to look at. And it's called it's a federal database, and it's the return on investment of every major, or almost every major that you could pick. And it'll give you 1 year pay. Here's an example. I know this text is going to be small. Here's the University of Virginia. You can even source it by school. And you can see, first off, on the far right, you can see what the return on investment is. And that's variable per person. But what would be your salary at age 25 if you took aerospace engineering versus architecture? Okay. And, it's going to be predictable to an extent. And I'm not going to go through every line here. You can feel free to pause the video, or we can circle back to a specific school if you're curious. But you can look, and what I want you to notice is on this page at the University of Virginia, and I'm not picking on Virginia, by the way, that's just the numbers we had handy. Biology general, which is kind of in the middle of the page, it's right above my head right here. It has a negative return on investment. Okay. And that's because versus the cost of going to Virginia versus the average salaries that biology graduates from Virginia are getting is a negative number. You're actually in debt to do that overall. So again, this is not the end all be all and saying, well, I guess Virginia and biology are out. You can't do that combination. No, you still can. I'm not saying that's wrong, but we just need to have this factored in. Right. So here's an example for Texas A&M. And you can see anthropology is one that kids have a tough time getting a positive return on their investment from. Okay. So I'm just encouraging you to look at this. It doesn't have to be your decision maker, but it's a resource. You can also do it for graduate degrees. So the same website will tell you for master's degrees. Here's master's degrees at NYU, for example. NYU, expensive school. We want to try to make sure we're getting our money's worth. One thing that, unfortunately, it doesn't appear like we get our money's worth in is foreign languages, literature, and linguistics. And I love literature. I love foreign languages. Like, all that stuff's great. The problem is it tends to be a negative return on investment for kids who go to NYU. So if that's what you want to study, maybe NYU isn't the school to go do that at, is kind of the point that this is starting to make. Right? This is why the parents need to be actively involved in the college decision-making process. So at least we go in with our eyes open here that, hey, NYU is a good school. I'm sure they have a great languages department or linguistics department. Maybe that's what your dream is. That's where you really want to go. Okay, we're going to go with our eyes open, knowing that the financial part of it might be an uphill battle in the short term, right? So there's also a federal college scorecard, which is just more broadly to colleges in general, not necessarily even by specific majors. but it's for kids who graduate from this school. What's their average or their median earnings, all that sort of stuff. Good data for us to look at. Again, it's just another piece of the puzzle. It's not the answer in and of itself. So a question that all of us would ask is, will my kid qualify for financial aid, and how does that impact the other money sources? Because if they qualify for financial aid, maybe I won't have to pay in as much. How much will I have to pay in? How does that all fit together, basically? So the question is best answered when you understand how aid, scholarships, and loans work together to produce the lowest college cost possible. And by the way, I haven't done the FAFSA other than when I did it for myself years ago. I'm assuming it still works the same way, which is when I did it, I filled out all the information. It comes up with a number and it says, hey, you've qualified for this much in aid. And then it says, and you put in that you're wanting to attend, in my case, the University of Minnesota. And here's the cost of that school. And here's to where your aid gets you to. Okay. So it got me some of the way there, but not all the way there. So then it says, okay, well, this gap right here, how would you like to take out some federal loans to pay for that gap? We'll pre-qualify you for them. And that's where it can get a little tricky, because the FAFSA, what I'm getting at is, will automatically give you loans, or not give them to you, but offer them to you as a solution for that gap. Whether that's really the right thing for you or not, they're going to offer it to you. Okay. You don't always want to take those. You might want to find another way to pay for that versus taking all the loans that they offer you. I think this is part of the student loan epidemic in our country, is just, oh, hey, I can get loans for the rest of it. Click, done. I've got loans now. And we didn't really have a conversation about whether that makes sense or not, or what the interest rates on those loans are and how they work and what you're going to school for, all that stuff, right? We didn't necessarily dive deep enough into that at the start. So be careful about that. Going on to financial aid, there's four main types: grants, scholarships, loans, and other borrowing options, okay? Grants are the best ones because you don't have to repay them. Those are, when you file your FAFSA, you're going to get Pell grants, potentially. Again, everybody's different, but that's one of the type of grant that they give out. It's need-based. So again, if you have a low expected family contribution, you should get more of these. You don't have to pay them back, and they're often from the government, okay? Simple. Scholarships also don't need to be repaid, which is great. They're usually awarded based on merit or other criteria, like you live in a certain location, you maybe have a parent who works for a certain company. We all have an idea of scholarships. Obviously, athletic scholarships or talent-based are huge. Can come from a variety of sources: private foundations, corporations, schools themselves. And then loans. You've got two different types of federal loans, okay? You've got subsidized, which means government pays interest accrued while the student is enrolled. Need-based, that's subsidized. That's when you don't pay interest until you get out of school. And unsubsidized, student pays interest during all periods of loan, though interest can be deferred while enrolled. So that means your interest is growing while you're enrolled. You're just not having to make payments yet. So neither one do you have to pay on until you graduate. But the subsidized is better because you're not actually even being charged interest while you're enrolled. Okay. So again, subsidized better than unsubsidized, but they're both still loans. You could, and this is where I come in, where we really need to make sure this is in your best interest: home equity loans, private loans. This would probably be through the parents, not the child, because the parents are going to be the one who have the assets to offer as collateral for a loan. I work with people who have student loans in their name for their kids. It's totally a thing that happens. It's not always good, but it's not always bad either. And it's part of the equation of figuring this out, where I can come in and help you, right? So if scholarship and grant sources, you can kind of get a sense of where those are coming from. Grants more likely to come from the government. Scholarships more likely to come from schools or be on the private side. Federal aid. So grants and work study jobs. We don't have to go through exactly what these are. You may be familiar with them if you, they're really fairly similar as far as I'm aware to how they've always been. But these are the things you can get from the federal government: grants and work study jobs, loans for students and parents. And that's one thing that I think a lot of people didn't realize right away, is that parents can also get federal school loans, and potentially tax credits, depending on how much you're paying out of pocket, or if you had education expenses, all that sort of stuff can factor into your taxes too, which is nice. Pell Grants, which I mentioned, this is the largest federal grant program. Most eligible households, and household, not just per person, but household, would have to have less than $70,000 in income to qualify. I'm not saying that's a hard number, but that's a good rule of thumb. And the maximum grant per year for the 2023-24 school year was $7,395. So that's not going to cover full tuition at very many schools, if any. So you're going to need other sources of funding as well. State sources, states vary widely. Obviously, most go to low-income students, but you can Google, and this would be another term that I would keep track of, the National Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators. If you Google that, you can find out about your state specifically and what might be offered or not offered, as the case may be. State universities. So now we're talking about actual individual schools. In-state schools are often, but not always, the cheapest. Okay, so again, a child may have the idea of, I want to go to a smaller school. I don't want to go to a big state school. Okay, well, not all state schools are huge, but some of them are, and maybe, your preference is one way. That's totally fair. But, consider state schools. I would say their cost is usually lower. A lot of them still offer great educations. Most of them do, I would argue. And merit aid is actually soaring. Universities are trying to boost their rankings. Again, this goes back to the idea that a lot of admissions departments right now are not filling the seats very easily. So they're trying to give out more money to entice good students to come to their school and boost their numbers. Take advantage of that. You're a shopper in this case. You should be shopping like you would for anything, like a house or a car. Get the best deal. State merit scholarships. Google the name of the school and scholarships. Okay, so University of Minnesota scholarships. Now, popular schools don't often have to offer as many scholarships because they're getting the enrollment that they need because they're big brands. So big schools around the country. It lists a few Ivy League schools, things like that. If you're looking for more aid, those might not be the best choices because they don't have to offer as much to still get the enrollment they want because they're prestigious. They get it anyway. And aid at private colleges. Merit awards are the biggest source of money for affluent families, meaning if you're a family that has money and you don't qualify for needs-based aid, you really want to focus on merit-based aid, scholarships. And often private colleges do give out more for scholarships than public schools. So that may be a plus in that direction when you're looking at it. And know that at the bottom line, schools want to attract good students. Okay, so if you have a good student, you're going to be able to get some benefit for that and shop around to find the best one. If you don't qualify for need-based aid and money is tight, so just because you have money or assets doesn't mean that money isn't tight, right? I think we know that. And so if you don't qualify for need-based and money is tight, the worst place to apply for college from a financial standpoint are the most highly ranked universities. Okay, counterintuitive, I know. But the reason behind this, again, is they don't have to offer a lot of merit-based aid because they're going to hit their enrollment numbers no matter what, because they're prestigious. They're the highly ranked ones, which means that if you're not going to get need-based and they're not going to offer you merit-based, you're going to pay more out of pocket. And that's going to be tougher on your bottom line. So keep that in mind when you're looking at it, right? Schools with the best financial aid are often elite. Most prestigious universities and liberal arts schools are most likely to give the most generous need-based financial aid packets, but usually no merit awards. So again, it all depends on where your expected family contribution falls in. You can help find institutional money. For example, on college data, you can go to their website and they'll help you get a sense of the colleges you're looking at and what they might provide to you. That's a great place to start. But how to evaluate a college's generosity? When you look at the college, you want to see what percentage of students receive merit awards and what the average is. You want to see what percentage of students receive need-based aid and how much that covers. And let me give you an example of that. So college data provides all this. You can go to college data, type in your school, and they'll give you an example. Let me give you a real example of Pomona College. And again, I'm not picking on them. This was just the example that was prepared. All right. They had 297, which is 75% of their freshman class, apply for financial aid. They found 226 of the 297 to have need, financial need, right? And Pomona College is a private school. It's fairly expensive as far as I'm aware. I'm not totally familiar with them. Of the 226 that were deemed to have need, all of them received financial aid, and all of them had that need fully met. Okay, so 100% was the average, meaning the average student who applied for financial aid and was found to have need received $51,000, almost $52,000 was the average amount received. Okay, so that was fantastic. They're really picking up a lot of the tab for kids who have a need. Pomona College would be a good answer to the question of, hey, if I qualify for needs-based aid, where would be a place that would maximize the amount they give me? Pomona College would be a good answer to that. Here's a poor example, Loyola Marymount. Again, not picking on anybody, but they had over 1,000 freshmen apply for aid. They only gave it to about half, and only 31% of the total of the people who received financial aid, got their need fully met. And it was only an average of 30,000. So that's a huge difference, right? Pomona to Loyola. Let's say you were somebody who had those two narrowed down as your finalists. This could make the decision for you, right? And again, you can apply this to any school. So you can also look at merit awards. So Beloit, for example, in Wisconsin, which is a small liberal arts school, fairly prestigious as far as I'm aware, but it's not name brand recognition. They had they gave less financial aid. They gave it to a lot of their students, but they didn't give a ton of financial aid. But they did give, if you look at the bottom down here by my head, a lot of merit-based aid. So you can kind of sort by that as well. Okay, well, I don't qualify for needs-based aid, but where it gives a lot of merit-based aid, Beloit's a good example. One of the reasons they did, by the way, is because they're an expensive liberal arts school, but they don't have the name brand of the Ivies. So they're looking to attract good students to kind of build that brand up. Take advantage of that. You're in a buyer's market here. That's kind of the point that I'm making with all this stuff. And of course, we all know private scholarships, there's competition for those. You've got to, actually earn them to a degree, or, be connected to an organization. But local scholarships, this is the key from this slide. Look for local because A, there's going to be by definition less competition if they're not statewide or national. But two, they're not often super well publicized. And if you do the work to find them, you can pick up smaller scholarships that add up to nice numbers over time that really didn't have a lot of people even looking at them. So always try to survey local scholarships as well. All right. Beware of the financial aid trap. Private scholarships may reduce your financial aid package. Here's the key. You can't receive more money in financial aid than it costs to attend. Once that you hit your cost to attend. Now, scholarships can be a little bit different if you just earn them, the merit-based, but the needs-based stuff, they're not going to pay you more than what it costs to attend the school. So if you get a private scholarship, could that reduce the financial aid package the school is going to give you? Yes, because they'll take that into account. That doesn't mean you don't apply for scholarships. Of course, you still do. But just know that going in and know that, if I get $10,000 in scholarships plus $20,000 of financial aid and the school only costs $20,000 to go to, I'm making 10 grand a year to go to school. No, that's not how it's going to work. The school is going to reduce your aid to equal the total purchase price when you factor in the scholarships. Okay. And if you're an affluent student from an affluent family, you're not going to get much financial aid needs-based anyway. So just focus on the scholarships in the first place. You're probably thinking, wow, that was a lot of information relayed to me very quickly, Anthony. How the heck would we go about even putting this into practice? Let's go back to our original problem, which is families often overpay for college, take on too much debt, and hurt their savings because they've tumbled unprepared into the late stage college pressure cooker. We talked about the cost. Let me skip this for just 1 second. Meet with me. I am willing to help you to figure this stuff out. We can help calculate your expected family contribution and prepare your FAFSA if that's the time, if you're ready to do the FAFSA, if you got a kid who's about to go to school. We can discuss what you as parents are prepared to pay, or grandparents. It doesn't have to be parents who can only help with school. We can look at the types of schools. Again, I'm not going to pick your college for you. That's a really personal decision. But I can help figure out the real cost of each school, and that may help you make your decision. So let me go back to where I was. These are the 4 keys, and then I'm going to wrap up here because I'm already just a little bit over time. Thanks for bearing with me. So 4 keys to cutting college costs. Parents must lead the process. I know that seems counterintuitive. That seems like you're really doing your kid a disservice. It's important that you help lead it. They can be the co-pilot, but you help lead it. Higher education is actually a buyer's market. Shop. You might get a better deal somewhere at an equivalent school that with an equivalent degree program, and you might get way more financial aid one place versus another. Okay, so shop. Don't just pick one and stick with it for personal reasons, unless that's what's most important to you. And if it is what it is, then it is what it is. Gather the price, expected family contribution, graduation rate, and starting salary. That'll help give you more information to help choose. And then understand how financial aid works to get the best price. Those are the 4 things. If you develop that strategy now, you'll be helping to protect your savings as parents and grandparents versus, just dealing with the consequences of whatever decision gets made after you have any chance to do anything about it. So I just mentioned this. I can help you with this. If you are interested in that, just get in touch with us. Here's all our information. So you've got our email, my email, our phone number. Set up a time to talk with us, and we'll just go through it together. And you may be saying, I don't even know where to start this conversation. Great, we'll help you start it. But feel free to reach out to us to help start this conversation. And again, you want to be doing this as early as when your kids are in a freshman year of high school, because it's that important to kind of get your arms around this early. So I really appreciate everybody being here. Are there any questions? Otherwise, we will take off. But if you have questions, please type them in the chat. If not, I will. I'll see you next month here. We'll just give it just a little bit in case any questions come through. And I did see, by the way, Aaron put the link to schedule a meeting with us in the chat, so you can copy paste that. And again, if we went through a ton of information, which not if we did, and you want it kind of distilled, or you've got some specific questions, set up a time and we can just go through what's important to you. So that's absolutely no problem. So I'll give it just a minute or 2 more here for any questions that come through. Oh, yes, good question. Thank you. Can we share the slides? Yes. What we will actually do is there's going to be a replay of this whole thing coming out probably within, about a week, Aaron?
Yeah, probably within the next week or 2.
Okay. So you'll be able to see a replay. Would you be able to email Heidi the actual presentation too, so she can look through the slides herself?
Yep, for sure. I'll do that right after we
end the call. So we'll get that out to you, Heidi, and we'll also we'll be publishing a whole replay so you can watch my commentary on the earlier parts too. Well, I tell you what, let's call it there. If there's any other questions I didn't get to, or you were still thinking about how to ask it, just reach out to me individually. Here's the contact info. I'm happy to answer it. If it's personal to you or whatever, we can go through it. But I really appreciate everybody tuning in, and we will see you next month. Next month, we're going back to the retiree conversation. We're going to talk about Medicare. So we'll see you then. Take care, everybody.